Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Your time is precious, so I'm going to try not to waste it, at least not today. I want to talk about my predictions for the next 6 months with respect to this mess we're in, this black hole of a situation that is consuming the entire planet. The only reason I even bother giving this issue a modicum of attention is because it has the potential to suck us into a nuclear Armageddon-like situation. That's the only reason. And for some of you who say, oh, you don't care about the people over there. No, it's not that. It's that you don't care about all the people that have died in all the wars that haven't gotten half the publicity that this one has gotten. So don't try to be sanctimonious for just a minute. You know full well the reason why we pay attention to this war is because it has the potential to destroy the planet. Now, my prediction for the next 6 months, you can call it conjecture, you can call it whatever you want. Trust me, I appreciate all the feedback in the comment section below. But I think that this could go one of many ways. But I'm going to lay out my timeline for you in a minute, but we do have to talk about some current events first. I will say that come spring 2023, we might see an isolated nuclear incident, which is localized and might spook the markets a little bit, but we quickly go back to business as usual, believe it or not. Or we might be in nuclear Armageddon at that time. We might be post-apocalyptic. Perhaps the pendulum is going to swing in the other direction. Maybe we will see some sort of magical peace talks emerge out of the G20. And all of a sudden, all the Wojaks of the world rejoice because Bitcoin goes back up to 1 million and we go back to the moon on all the SPAC stocks. That could be. It could happen, although I'm pretty sure you guys know which direction I'm leaning towards in terms of what I think is going to come about. Now, before we do that, there's a few things we need to share. We need to talk about the events of the last 24 hours, of which there are many. We also need to share this resource with you, which is going to give you some perspective on why Russia is doing what it's doing, and hopefully it's going to debunk some of the myths with respect to the capabilities of the Russian military. Are they running out of ammo and all this other nonsense? Okay, now first off, the thing that we need to talk about is Finland's Ministry of Health has told its citizens to stock up on iodine pills. What a surprise! What a surprise. In case of a radiation emergency. On Tuesday, after this recommendation was made at a media event, their largest chain of pharmaceutical outlets reported that stocks of iodine tablets had practically sold out nationwide. Now, why is Poland refurbishing 62,000 bunkers within the next 2 months? They made that specific target, the next 2 months. Why are all of the Baltic states and Finland telling their populations that they need to stockpile iodine pills? Why is the U.S. government spending $300 million on acute radiation sickness medications in the thick of what we all know is a recession? We know the U.S. is $31 trillion in debt, so why are they spending $300 million? I know that's only 1/3 of a billion, but that's still a lot of money for one medication, okay? For one medication that is solely for the purpose of treating acute radiation sickness in the context of nuclear war, because the department that is purchasing it is I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it is solely for the purpose of preparing the nation for strategic nuclear war, whatever you want to call it, okay? So why are all these things happening? Why is the New York City putting out a PSA about how to survive a nuclear conflict? Why is Biden talking about nuclear Armageddon? Why is NATO proceeding with their nuclear drills knowing that it's likely going to provoke the Russians? Why is there endless nuclear rhetoric, yet we are told at the same time that there's nothing to worry about? Okay, that don't worry, the Russians are not a heightened state of readiness at all. We don't sense that the Russians are concerned at all about their strategic nuclear arsenal being deployed anytime in the near future, which is why, of course, they just put their biggest nuclear submarine out to sea, which is why they're building Sarmat missiles that can carry 50 warheads, which can basically wipe states the size of Texas off the map with one missile. Yeah, they're not concerned at all about nuclear warfare, okay? So they're trying to speak out of both sides of their mouth. They're preparing for SHTF. Even Tulsi Gabbard, there's things I don't like about her. There's things okay, whatever. She's fine. She on Joe Rogan today came on and said, reiterated what I've said on this channel. It's like, look, they're playing with our money. Okay, they're going to be able to save themselves. So it's much less of a risk. Even though, yes, I doubt they want to see the world destroyed, but when you have a nice cushy bunker with 25 years worth of food stored in it and all of the weaponry you're going to need to defend it from the mutated, radiated hordes, then you're not really that concerned. You're not as concerned as the rest of us about starting a potential nuclear war. Now, I just wanted to put that out there because it adds to the overwhelming body of evidence that suggests that governments around the world are preparing for this stuff. Now, they're telling people to prepare iodine. If you want to know how to administer iodine to treat or to prevent radiation ingestion through the thyroid, go and watch the video that we did with Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy. If you want FDA-approved potassium iodide pills, you can get some at CanadianPreparedness.com. Supplies are extremely limited due to the government buying it all, to be brutally honest. So it is what it is. We know that they're preparing for something. Now, there's a variety of other stories to touch on. Maybe the last one I'll touch on is the issue of what has just transpired in Ukraine in the last 48 hours with the Russians targeting their critical infrastructure. Now, apparently, across only the span of 48 hours, they were able to take out 30% of Ukraine's electrical grid. Now, is that going to be repairable? I'm sure it will at some point. But you're seeing that the Western media is drastically downplaying these attacks as being completely inconsequential. Okay, they're showing pictures of a couple cars on fire in a street. There was one picture they showed of a crater that was put in the middle of the street, which was quickly covered up, and they were bragging about how they were able to do it in record time. And that's all great. Okay, I'm glad that if the casualties that we're reporting are as minimal, then that's amazing. And any casualty is bad, don't get me wrong. But I'm just glad that the casualties weren't as worse as they potentially could have been, for the simple fact that they have apparently taken out 30% of Ukraine's electrical grid. This has caused such a concern with the Ukrainians that they are no longer exporting electricity. Believe it or not, they are still exporting electricity to Europe, okay? So this is concerning. For one, Europe is already at an energy shortfall and an electricity shortfall. So this is only going to make that work as we descend into the winter months. Apparently, they've also lost about 80% of their air defense systems, which is why Zelensky and Biden were talking on the phone about getting more of these NASAMS, or surface-to-air missile systems, in order to protect. Or maybe they're going to give them Patriot missiles. I don't know what they're going to give them. They're probably going to send them something in order to protect the skies. That's going to be the next move, even though they already have some of that stuff, but a lot of it now has been neutralized. So they're panicking because in the span of just a day, Russia was able to use these precision-guided strikes to basically beyond decimate Ukraine's infrastructure. Now, just imagine what a full response would look like. You have a lot of people right now talking about how Russia is running out of ammunition, they're running out of artillery, they're running out of their precision-guided munitions. But let's get something straight here, okay? The Russian military has been restrained for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons, check out this map. This is from the Rendelli Foundation. This is out of Georgia, not Georgia the state, but Georgia the country. This shows you an overview, an interactive map of the Russian military. Okay, Russia is massive. It spans half the planet, from Japan all the way over to Sweden and Finland. Now, all of this are Russian military installations. So we have land maneuver, we have artillery military forces, we have naval forces, aerospace forces, air defense forces, and a variety of different military installations. We're talking about corps, battalions, brigades, divisions, you name it. Just thousands and hundreds of thousands of active duty military personnel. And then over down here in this corner, you have about 150,000 guys. Okay, and this is mostly up to date. I believe this is September. The last time it was updated was in September. Now, this is not a real-time projection of what's going on the ground. For that, you'll have to go to Russian and Ukrainian force disposition, where they showed you all of the exact battalions and where they are, brigades and whatnot. But here is just a general overview of the permanent and semi-permanent Russian installations. Now, Russia has a lot of territory that they need to defend, okay? One thing I do agree with Peter Zayan about, or Zan, or Zion, or however you want to pronounce it. I don't agree with his cockamamie theories about demographic projections and how China is going to collapse because there's not enough people and all this nuttiness. But I do agree with him that Russia is a massive country, and in many cases, their military is stretched thin. Now, one thing that Russia will be able to make into perpetuity, no matter how many microchips they have, are artillery shells and bullets. Okay, they have the metals, they have all of the ingredients, the saltpeter and the black powder and the whatever stuff you need to make that kind of stuff. They have it. So they can make that stuff till the cows come home, till the fat lady sings. The Russians ain't running out of artillery shells. It's just never, ever, ever going to happen. They have 135 million people that they can utilize War Powers Acts in order to get them working on that stuff. They're never going to run out of that stuff. So this fantasy, and they're probably not going to run out of the precision-guided munitions either. There's these speculations that they can only build a certain amount of missiles so long, but that's on during normal times. That's not when you have war measures acts kicking into place, like has been the case since summertime. So this idea that the Russians are somehow, and if you go and click on any of these, by the way, it tells you exactly, how much is in that one particular spot. So you got 6 anti-tank guns, 12 self-propelled rifles. If we go over here, is this a mechanized brigade? Yeah, it is. So you got 40 tanks, 120 infantry fighting vehicles. So a lot of their stuff is nowhere even close to Ukraine. Okay, so a lot of these conscripts that are going to be rolling in there are either going to be going probably throughout Russia, and they're going to take up positions out there, and they're going to replace the trained military that is going to come in and go into Ukraine, or they're just going to be holding defensive positions while the seasoned soldiers and these 70,000 Chechens and what is the Wagner group and all the rest of them are going to do the offensive maneuvers. Okay, so yeah, I mean I hate to say, but there's a lot of people right now. Every single pro-Ukrainian commentator, and I don't consider myself a pro-Russian commentator or a pro-Ukrainian commentator. I'm trying to look at this objectively, I give all of these commentators the time of day in order to explain themselves and try to convince me that what I'm saying here is incorrect. And their arguments are so they're so overconfident, and the hubris that they exhibit, I always just remind myself, like, pride comes before the fall. Every single thing that comes out of these people's mouth is like Russophobic or, Putin evil, memes about, funny memes about how, look, we're invincible and you can't stop us. And it's just like, it's delusional thinking because you put yourself at a disadvantage. It's kind of like, you ever watch those instant karma compilations, the UFC, where you get the one cocky guy who's, in the press conference, he's going after the guy and he's pushing him and he's making a big scene. And then come fight day, he just gets knocked out like in the first, minute because, it was all just bluster, right? So that's what's kind of happening. And that's why I'm not convinced by this counteroffensive stuff, which is all but ground to a halt anyways. So when you're, as Sun Tzu says, appear strong when you are in fact weak. And that's kind of those are the vibes I'm getting. I'm not getting any sort of sense that the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold back a full-scale Russian offensive. There doesn't seem to be anything to indicate that at this point. Now, I could be wrong, okay? And I hope I'm wrong in the sense that no more Ukrainians have to die as a result of this invasion. I do hope I'm wrong about that. But the facts just don't bear that out at all. I mean, we've seen what the Russians were able to accomplish for just one day, something they could have done all along. They could have done that a long time ago. The fact that they hadn't done it yet should tell people something, should tell people that they're obviously holding back. I mean, everybody knows that, but everybody plays dumb. Now, how is this all going to play out is the question. That is the big question. Now, one thing I will say, though, and I'm not sure if you guys have noticed this, you probably have, before I get into my predictions, is that I'm noticing, whether it's Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, the Tulsi Gabbard thing, the Overton window is starting to shift to one that is less, in the same way it did with COVID and the criticisms that people had of the government's handling of it. Over time, you know, the media had to become more sympathetic to these dissident voices because they just became too loud. And when you get people like Elon Musk in there, you know, criticizing the approach to things, and you just can't, I mean, you can make all the memes you want, but that carries a lot of weight. And it might be met with resistance right away, but it's a sign that perhaps, you know, the support for this unwavering support for this endless go nowhere conflict has its limits, we'll say. Now, but again, we're only one major event away from people turning into, you know, Russophobic zombies who are rounding people up and putting them in camps. And I mean, it's scary, the level of commitment that some people have towards a country who they've never been to. They don't know what it's about. They don't know the history. They're just told that this is what you need to stand for. This is good, so you need to support it, and anybody who doesn't support it is bad. And that's the scariest kind of person, man. I mean, I go and I read the comment sections on some of these videos where they're just, you know, being very hateful. Like, really, like, let's say this. If you were trying to convince these Russians to not partake in this war, imagine they go on to one of these videos and imagine they're reading all these comments, these anti-Russian comments, where they're just disparaging stuff. It's not like, even with, you know, what happened in World War II, people always distinguish, at least for the most part anyways, between the German people and the actual fascist ideology. People make that discernment, but they're not making that discernment in these comment sections. You know, they're calling them names, they're calling them orcs and this and that. And this is supposed to be, you really think that that is going to bring them over to your side? Or is that just going to make them more patriotic? That's what's going to happen. It's just going to make them more patriotic and more ready to enlist. So anyways, so what's going to happen in the next 6 months? It's likely this Ukrainian counteroffensive has pretty much stalled. They've mined the roads and they've blown out the bridges to Belarus. Now, Belarus's army is fairly minuscule. Okay, they have a population of 9 million. Lukashenko likes to brag about how he can bring 500,000 troops up to the ready, but that's all, that's exaggeration. Because if that was the case, then just imagine how many troops Russia could say they could bring. They have a population which is 15 times bigger. So that means they could bring technically, you know, they technically have 25 million able-bodied men that are capable of fighting in a war. But anyways, their actual army in Belarus is around 15 to 20,000. Now, the Ukrainians are concerned, or they're saying that they're concerned about the Belarusians invading, or at least the Russians, who now are going to be doing joint operations with the Belarusians, which basically just means that the Russians are going to go and take over and integrate into the Belarusian army, and likely, at least from the Ukrainian point of view, stage attacks from the north. Okay, I guess I might as well pull up a map just so you guys kind of know what I'm talking about here. So here's Belarus up here. Here's the Belarusian border here. and here's Kiev. So the concern is, just like it was at the beginning of the war, that the Russians were going to come down through here and attack Kiev, right? And that's what the concern is again, that they're going to do that. So what the Belarusians are saying is, no, we got word from our KGB agents, our intel, that it was actually the Ukrainians who are going to try to attack us. Now, to me, that seems kind of unlikely. Like, why would the Ukrainians open up another front with Belarus when they have their hands full with the Russians, when they know that they're mobilizing, when their critical infrastructure is being targeted? It makes more sense on the surface that the Ukrainians would be mining the roads and blowing out the bridges because they're worried about an invasion from the north. So I'm not siding with Lukashenko on that one. This guy, he's somewhat of a blowhard, but he also, with blowhards, it's good because they also tell you the truth in a lot of ways. In a lot of times, loose lips sink ships, and I'm pretty sure that he's been called into a back room before to have a conversation with Putin about how much he blabs about the master plan, because he does like to blab. Now, Belarus has also said that, and I don't know if they're just using this to galvanize their own population, because remember, this country, Belarus, back in late 2020, they had their own civil unrest issues where the government was getting ready to be overthrown. Whether you think it was from the outside in or not, and maybe it was the Western fomented coup attempt or something like that. I don't know, Orange Revolution or a color revolution, whatever you want to call it. There was all those videos of the guys with the masks putting all the women who are protesting into vans and that type of thing. I don't think it really escalated to the point where there was a real threat of a coup, but it was getting there, okay? That's kind of what you would see beforehand. Anyways, they're worried about being destabilized, and Belarus is claiming, according to their, who is it again? Ivan Turtle, chairman of the State Security Committee of the Republic, thinks that the West is exploring the use of using tactical nuclear weapons on them. So are they just saying this in order to galvanize their own population for war? Because remember, they can't just say, hey guys, we're going to war. And I mean, if you've ever watched the Belarusian president give a speech to his parliament or whatever it is they have there, there's a look of disdain on many of their faces, okay? They're not too impressed about him giving his total allegiance to Russia. At least some of them aren't anyways. So anyways, they're saying that it's Ukraine that's getting ready to make a dirty bomb or something like that. And here's one thing for you guys to consider is that no matter how this war plays out, whether you believe the narrative that the Russians have their backs up against the wall or the Ukrainians, okay, in either of those scenarios, if one of those scenarios is true, say the Russians don't have infinite ammo, like I'm saying, say they don't have infinite precision-guided munitions, and they have to ultimately resort to tactical nuclear weapons. That's ultimately what they're going to do. If they get backed up to the line, okay, if the Ukrainians can push them all the way back, this is going to be existential, especially if they go to Crimea. I mean, the first Ukrainian soldier that crosses over into Crimea, shit's going to hit the fan long before that happens. So when they're saying that, we definitely are going to get Crimea back, and you have NATO, when you have Jens Stoltenberg today saying that if NATO loses the war, then NATO loses altogether, which is kind of what I've been saying for a while. And it's true. Okay, if USA and NATO lose this war, that's it. Okay, Western hegemony is finished. It's the beginning of the end. If that happens, if they are able, if the United States just puts everything in there after the midterms, which they're going to, doesn't matter if the Republicans or Democrats get in there, it doesn't matter. They're going to go balls to the wall. They're going to put in as much as they can without the Russians getting the nuclear trigger finger too itchy, okay? If they, by some stroke of luck, by some unicorn energy, are able to push the Russians all the way back, the Russians are doing something. They're using a nuke somehow, some way. If the Ukrainians get pushed all the way back, there is a good chance, there is a possibility of a nuke being used. Now, I don't think they would be able to justify it. I don't even think Zelensky with all his PR clout, will be able to justify the use of a nuclear bomb. But because the fog of war is so thick right now, and because there's so much plausible deniability, because we live in a world where one of the biggest pipelines that cost the Russians and other countries surrounding it like $20 billion to build, and many years, resources, manpower. When we live in a society where people will actually believe that they would do that themselves, I mean, people will probably believe anything. So, they could probably say that, the Russians like nuked themselves, and people would believe it at this point, because we're just so dumbed down that, people are going to believe anything. And they'll probably have some weird, compelling argument too. Anyways, so we're going to see after the midterms a ratcheting up of military support, because it's going to be do or die. This is when the Ukrainian or the Russian offensive is going to kick into high gear in the winter months. By January, this is when, all of the electricity and gas probably throughout Ukraine has stopped flowing to Europe. Europe is freezing at this point. The industry is shut down. There's probably not riots in the streets in some places because it's just too damn cold. But a lot of people are questioning why the hell they're so committed to NATO, why the hell they're so committed to Poland, okay, especially when Poland is sitting there nagging us for, 1.3 trillion in reparations. Do you really think the German people, as complacent as they might be in normal times, are going to take that? Maybe they will, but you're going to start seeing resistance movements emerging to this. Now, the only thing that is going to put the brakes on that and cause Europeans to make more sacrifices is if there is a Belarusian or Russian attack on NATO, okay? People need to feel threatened. People need to feel as though this is our war. And right now, I think people are so far removed from the front line, in spite of the fact that we know that this war would have been over in April, most likely, if NATO and the United States wasn't pumping billions and billions of dollars into it every single week. Okay, in spite of that direct one-to-one relationship with the outcome of the war and Europe and the United States support, people simply do not relate. Okay, and in order for people to relate, the war has to come to them somehow. So perhaps there'll be another attack on critical infrastructure in Europe somewhere, which is going to piss people off, which will commit them to the conflict and not see the disintegration of NATO. Because one of the biggest nightmares these countries all have, I'm sure, and I'm just speculating here, this is pure conjecture. One of their biggest concerns is that, Germany, France, Italy, they all say, maybe this NATO thing isn't for us. And then from there, the whole NATO alliance falls apart. And guess what? The war's on Poland's soil now, but nobody's coming to the rescue anymore. But don't worry, because the United States is going to be there to save the day. So here's what I predict. I predict come springtime, after the Russians have steamrolled through a good part of Ukraine. Now, if they don't, then if they can't do it by then, that's when you know that maybe the Russian military just simply isn't capable of doing this. I mean, because now they got General Armageddon in there. I mean, there's really no excuses. Apparently, Putin is trying to get the Duma to approve a declaration of all-out war on Ukraine. And I mean, after that, if they still can't do it, then, it's not going to happen. But because it's probably going to happen, the United States is going to be like, all right, we need to do something, right? We need to spend more money. And a $31 trillion debt country has no problem spending more money on the military-industrial complex. So that's when lots of people in the U.S. are going to get the call. You're going to get the call. People in the U.K. are going to get the call. Remember when Patrick What's-His-Face, the general of U.K., said, get your loved ones prepared because you're going to have to at some point tell them that you're going to go and fight this war? That's what they're referring to. You're going to see all these countries have a lot more troops. And it's probably going to be Americans and Brits because a lot of these countries are going to be too pissed off and they're not going to want to fight. That's what I see happening. And yeah, potentially, depending on how things go, we could see a nuclear incident. I mean, they would not be preparing their countries for their populations in the way that they are with the bunker building and the preparation for radiological incidents if it wasn't a real threat. And this right here, when we get to this point where you have, maybe this is like rump state Ukraine here, Zelensky is off somewhere in some island somewhere, living it up and doing the whole green screen thing, like the Hunger Games thing, from the comfort of his living room. Maybe when that happens, that's when we're like really on the razor's edge of nuclear war. Because that's when you're going to have American soldiers looking right across from Russian soldiers. And like right now, we're at a higher risk of nuclear war than we were at the Cold War, arguably, regardless of what all of the puppets say. They're speaking out of two sides of their mouth. You can't say that we're at the highest risk of nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis, yet don't worry, we don't see any Russian posturing. They're in the DEFCON 3 to DEFCON 2 level. I'm almost 100% certain about it. But when we get to that point, come spring, that's when we're like on the razor's edge of potential nuclear escalation. Okay? Now, how close we are depends on how far Russia makes it. As Russia says, if we lose the war, everybody loses. If Ukraine loses, then Ukraine loses. And when Russia says that, they mean that, they're talking about nuclear war, right? So that's kind of as far ahead as I can envision this playing out. But honestly, it could go a lot of ways. It really depends on how powerful the motivation is to support this conflict. Because so many people are so far removed from it, they don't see the money coming off their own paycheck to support this. It could go on for a long time. And like I say, I'm reading these comments on these very, very, it's one thing to be pro-Ukrainian people. It's another thing to be pro-conflict and not have an awareness of all the implications. And some of the comments I'm seeing on it are scary. They show no signs of abating. It seems that it doesn't matter how many sacrifices they have to make, they will make it. That's the mindset of a lot of people. So it doesn't look good. Anyways, what else is in the news today? We have, and I'll probably release this video early tomorrow morning, so expect another video later on today. There was a story that came out of, Starlink. Now, apparently the Russians are using this laser to take out Starlink satellites, or at least that's one explanation. Some people think that the missile strikes incapacitated some of these Starlink terminals. But as far as I know, how Starlink works is it's a little mini satellite, like we've demonstrated it twice on the channel before. I don't think you need any like towers or terminals or anything like that, unless they're referring to the actual satellites themselves. Now, the Russians have this system called like Peresvit or something like that, where it's a laser which can actually disable satellites. And I presume this would work even better on the low Earth orbit satellites that Starlink are. Now, this also could be because of Elon Musk decide to pull the plug because of some of the nasty comments that he received from the Ukrainian administration. But regardless, that's an interesting story unfolding unto itself. We also have Taiwan making a new red line. Now, this one is interesting. It's going to be neat to see if the Chinese actually honor this red line or if this just makes the war all the more expedited. They are saying that they are going to shoot down any drones that fly into Taiwanese airspace. If you recall, in the past, and pretty much once a week, Chinese planes are making incursions into Taiwanese airspace. Well, they're saying now that We're not going to let that slide anymore, at least for drones. Maybe for airplanes they will, because maybe they know that would be a major escalation that they're not prepared to deal with. But yeah, that's the new red line. Any drones entering Taiwan's airspace will be regarded as a first strike and will result in war. And that's when everybody, all the sanctimonious soy boys, are going to change all of their avatars from, what is it, blue and yellow to whatever the Taiwan flag is, I guess. That'll be the new flavor of the month. That'll be the new way of saying that you're more ethically evolved than everybody else. My friends, these are complicated states of affairs. Nobody is simply all good and all evil. And we must be very, very careful that in our disdain for the other side, that we don't become monsters ourselves. I'm sure there's some sort of quote about that. Be careful you don't become a monster yourself in hunting monsters or something like that. Somebody post it in the comment section below. My brain is spent. In fact, I'm still very sick. I did this video about 2 hours ago, but I was like a snotty-nosed kid blowing my nose every few minutes, and then I watched it, and it was the most disgusting thing I've ever watched in my life. So I popped a few Tylenol. I was able to get through it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.